Hello, and welcome to the Ashley Taylor Wellness Podcast. This is your host, Ashley. On this podcast, we talk about all things beauty, health, wellness, and optimization. I strongly believe that one size does not fit all. Wellness isn't just about the absence of dis-ease. It's also about feeling our best, knowing how to take care of ourselves, and learning to listen to and honor our needs. I am a nurse of over 10 years turned coach, and I have learned so much about both conventional and alternative options, and I'm here to help you expand your options. I'm also here to inspire you to learn new ways to improve your quality of life and take your power back. I'm so excited that you're here, and let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Ashley Taylor Wellness Podcast. I'm really excited because it's been such an amazing podcast so far, High Maintenance Hippie, but I am rebranding it. And I felt that this would be more appropriate. We'll still be discussing all things health, wellness, optimization, and beauty, but I really want to dial in on wellness and optimization and make it more friendly for the men out there. And today's guest is Mollie Eastman. I'm really excited to connect because we have gone to a lot of the same events, have a lot of the same mutual friends, and have a strong shared passion for high quality sleep. Mollie is a coach, a speaker, podcaster, a writer, and a course creator. So she's here to share so much wisdom with us today. And I think this will be a really great episode for someone who's looking to optimize. So thank you so much for being here today, Mollie.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Like I was sharing before we hit record, I feel like there's just so many amazing kind of Venn diagram overlaps with our worlds and interests and conversations. So this is going to be great.
Yeah. Okay, so I got into sleep by not sleeping.
Yeah.
I was a nurse starting in 2013, and my requirement was to do, I believe, 2 night shifts and 1 day shift a week. And it was so disorienting. I really struggled with it. Some people could do it, but I was a newbie nurse, and that's just what I had to do. So learn the hard way after years and years and years. I am a daytime person. I like sleep. And that's how I really got into it after crashing. So why did you become so passionate about sleep?
Well, I love how eloquently you put that, because that's exactly sort of the genesis for my career. And I never imagined that this would at all be my life. And I'm so grateful for it. And it began from exactly what you were just sharing. In my world, it was a period of a real breakdown with my sleep. And what I now think of my life in a 3-part series, I think of it as what life looked like before I went through this period of life, during and after. And the before was really just a mix of narratives and labels around my sleep, meaning I would say things like, I'm a short sleeper, I'm a night owl, it's in my genes, and I'll sleep when I'm dead, and all these sort of things. And I would manage my life in alignment with those beliefs and, kind of ways of constructing reality. So what that looked like was I would push the envelope as years went by. This was as kid, teenage years, and into college. And I kept pushing the envelope, and I would get more and more pronounced with these behaviors. I would say things like, well, what's the big deal? I can just sleep in. I'm an entrepreneur I make my own hours. Who cares? Not connecting the dots with these deleterious effects with my health. So not really understanding that the beginnings of the ulcer, the anxiety that was mounting and mounting, issues with my cycle throughout as years went on, and many other issues that kind of came about, I wasn't connecting the dots. And so eventually what ended up happening was, as a serial entrepreneur in Manhattan, burning the candle at both ends, I went through this period of a breakdown with my sleep. Suddenly, what was count onable, that you would go into bed and you would sleep, suddenly came into question. And what that would look like was just nights spent where you would have it as if you just didn't get the sleep that you needed. You just went to bed, and then the next day you left and you didn't get any of that sleep. And it started becoming very frightening and scary, because it started to become a question of, am I stuck like this? What is happening? And feeling like I'm losing my mind, like really concerned about my mental health, my well-being. And am I now going to be destined to take a whole litany of medications or something to do something that I thought was count onable, like sleep? And what ended up happening was eventually at a low point, I went to the doctors and I leave with sleeping pills and anti-anxiety medications all throughout the next few months. And it begins to get very, very concerning because now I start going down the rabbit hole on forums and what have you, and start hearing stories that are very unnerving of now people, once you start in on some of these medications, oh, good luck. Now you're on these for the rest of your life. And some of these things, warning, don't go down these rabbit holes or forums when you are struggling with your sleep. And so what ended up happening was I was wanting to find examples of people who had made it through to the other side and actually was able to restore the workability with their sleep. And I remember vividly at different points thinking, why is there not an AA for sleep or places that you can go, support group? Because it felt so embarrassing, scary, lonely, like I was the only person on the planet going through this. Naturally, I now know that that is not the case, but it felt like that at the time. What ensued was going down this rabbit hole to understand what does it take to get great sleep, not just because, but because I had a real problem and I wanted a solution. So I spent a lot of time, energy, effort, money, all the things to get this back on track. And not only to bring back the sleep that I had, which, as I shared, wasn't even that great, but then to actually restore sleep and then discover that it is available to me to have this optimized sleep, or to actually wake up and feel great, which I had never experienced. I didn't even think that was on the table for me. So once I started actually waking up and feeling well, consistently, this changed my whole life. I couldn't stop talking about it. I shared I was on all those forums. So then I started sharing what was working for me. And, we started having side phone conversations, and organically ends up growing what now is Sleep as a Skill. And on the other side of that, today we have a whole niche in particularly work with online poker players and live poker players is kind of part of our bread and butter as the people that are really interested in up-leveling their performance through optimization and metric-driven kind of well-being. So they're a part of what we've created. And through that, but it's not exclusive to those individuals, they just stand as an example of people that are challenged by their environment and their shift work and what have you, which I know we're going to talk about all these things. All that to say that coming from a place that the great sleep is not available to me, it turned out that that was not true. And I am a stand that anyone listening, no matter where you might be at with your sleep, whether you say, oh, my sleep's fine, I just would maybe like to sleep a bit better, or you're really struggling, or anywhere in between, I am clear that we can take things to the next level, measurably and subjectively.
Yeah. I mean, very passionate about sleep, but learned that the hard way after some shift work. So World Health Organization, they talk about shift work being a group 2A possible carcinogen. So that was not shared with me before I took on my night shift job for an extra $4 an hour.
Yeah.
And at the time I was so focused on the short term. And I think a lot of people are when they say, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I'll sleep when I'm dead. I actually feel dead without sleep, or you'll get the worst version of me possible. Just nasty, emotional, reactive. I don't enjoy that quality of life. People think about sleep duration, just like they think about calories, but I think there's so much more to it, like sleep quality and all of that. So what have you learned regarding shift work and why that is so damaging to a person? Why could that potentially be carcinogenic for someone if they are out of alignment with nature in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And one, I acknowledge you for having ventured down that path and seeing what that can do to our well-being and our experience of life and how that can really shift things. And, coming on the other side and being able to set yourself up for wellness and success, it's just a big deal because so many people do experience those deleterious effects with their health. So kudos to you and for helping to support people because it's a big deal. Now, a lot of the grounding ethos that the things that we do with Sleep as a Skill is all rooted in chronobiology, the science of time and how time affects our biology. And this is a really exciting area of study, relatively new area of study. And it's looking at simply the timing of how we align our days and our nights, and where can we bring workability, and where do things start to not seem to respond well from a biological standpoint when we go outside of these bounds. What are the bounds? Well, as human beings, we are diurnal creatures, meaning that we're meant to be active by day and at rest at night. We're not nocturnal. When you do a lot of mouse studies or what have you, we're looking at nocturnal animals, and that is not us. So what we are discovering is simply the act of being awake and active at the times where we are not designed to be such, that we see a multitude of things come up. That includes that immune function, cancer causing agents, but it's not even just refined to that group. It appears to then also affect things like our waistline, so obesity rates, diabetes. We look at things like psychiatric disorders, reproductive health, and certainly, of course, our sleep-wake cycles all coming into play as a result of just doing the exact same thing you would be doing at 2 a.m. versus 2 p.m. We see a lot of different problems with that. Why would we see that? Well, it appears that these circadian rhythms that are functioning throughout our body, so every cell and organ in our body having these clocks, and all being communicated to and kept on time with our suprachiasmatic nucleus, our master clock, this choreographer that then is communicating with all these peripheral clocks in every cell and organ and tissue in our body. When those things become out of alignment, we might think of, when we hear the term circadian rhythm, this 24-hour rhythm, we might just think sleep wake, which makes sense because that is very pronounced and so clear. And what's really fascinating is that we start to discover all of these other it spills or dominoes into all these other areas of life, and including what you pointed to so beautifully, even just our cognition, our interpersonal relationships. I mean, we're talking things like our ability to read people and facial expressions. I mean, things that you would not expect to be impacted are impacted. And we can see this measurably so too with our wearables. So one of our commitments with Sleep is a Skill is bringing this intersection of technology, accountability, and behavioral change. And so when you start wearing, I know you love your Oura ring too, and every person that we work with is wearing an Oura ring to participate in our program. So we've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different data points as far as it relates to how people are optimizing their sleep. So we see it on the ground when people are moving around the timing of their sleep. So certainly with shift work, but also rotating shifts being particularly problematic. And then just the general social jet lag. So we see that consistency with sleep, but also alignment with these rhythms of nature becomes so paramount for your optimization of your health.
So what would you say to someone who is working night shift? And at that time, this is what I did. And I don't know if I didn't know the things that I know today.
Sure.
But when I would leave, I would put on sunglasses because I didn't want to get morning light in my eyes. I wanted to just go home, but I fell asleep at the wheel twice. So I realized, yes, that was helping me sleep when I got home, but am I going to get home safely? So that was one piece. Definitely needed blackout curtains during the day. I agree with what you say about rotating shifts. In my own personal experience, it was even more disorienting than just doing 3 nights. So what would you say to somebody as far as should they do all 3 shifts in a row and then get back to a day schedule? What advice would you have to someone who is working those overnight shifts until 7 or 8 in the morning?
Yeah, really good points. And you pointed to the dangers as well. Okay, so I would say kind of an ethos or an approach and 2 resources. So 1, how can you begin to, as much as possible, I know this is easier said than done, but creating this as a chosen lifestyle throughout the time that you are doing this, but knowing the risks involved. But of course, we depend on our shift workers. They are crucial for our well-being. So thank you for the work that you've done. I was in a major car accident and I was, so grateful for all the people that helped support me during that time in the hospital. We depend on these people. So really grateful for that. And how can we support them? And across all industries. So one, can we create as much of a lifestyle as humanly possible with this new chosen rhythm? So hopefully we can maintain you consistently, whatever, get to work at midnight or whatever it is, but it's the same across the board. And then can we also maintain that on the weekends as well? And I know that's really can be a challenge for people because you also want to bond with your friends and spend time and do the, kind of appointments that go to the bank or whatever you got to get done. And those hours are set up to facilitate daytime, lifestyles. So it can become problematic. But if we can create as much of a consistent that your weekdays look really pretty identical to your weekends, even with that, that would be the one place that we want to begin. Rotating shift work is a whole other conversation. At least starting there. And then in alignment with this group is particularly important for starting to understand some of the conversations that we're having around circadian rhythm entrainment and what you were speaking to of minding your light, dark environments and behaviors and all of these things. So we want to bring in that education. So there are two resources. One, I would suggest the Shiftwork app, and this is relatively new. This is from the same creators that created the Time Shifter app. And they're using the same algorithm, right, that NASA uses to keep their astronauts on time. When, they're shuttling through space, the sun is rising and setting every 90 minutes. So they take it very seriously, keeping the well-being of their astronauts on track. And so utilizing that same algorithm, we can use that to apply for long-haul travel, as well as then applying it to whatever shift work you might be engaging in. And so you can kind of set in what your schedule is. And then out pops an itinerary from even preemptively, especially if you're rotating shift work, how you can begin to adjust in advance and then during and after. If you have that maintaining, then how can you just set up a life where you have very different light, dark cycles and activities across the board, including meal timing, et cetera. And then the last resource would be a relatively newer book. It's called The Sleep Fix. And this was created by an ABC correspondent who's has essentially a night shift worker, loved the job, didn't want to have to just leave the job after you hear all these things about shift working and the effects on your health, but at odds when you actually really want to keep that going. So how can you do that to the best of your ability? That book kind of walks through some ways that you can set up your environment and things that you can bring into play.
Okay, so that's really cool about that app. I'm definitely going to check that out. Yeah. Although I will never sign up for a night shift ever again.
Not even with the $4 an hour increase. Come on.
It's wild. And I ate it up. I ate it up. But
I getcha.
Lesson learned. I think the biggest thing was memory. And one of the questions that I get a lot is about deep sleep. So why is sleep quality? And when I'm talking about sleep quality, even just looking at Oura ring metrics, REM sleep, deep sleep, latency, restfulness, but deep sleep and REM sleep are big ones. So what is deep sleep doing for the body? And if I'm not experiencing that due to my sleep schedule from my night shift, what might that lead to? Why might that affect my health in a negative way? Deep sleep specifically.
Yeah. So two things. One, if you're listening and you have like fears or concerns, if you're tracking and you have certain metrics coming out back to you around your deep sleep numbers, do just know that of all the metrics that we're taking, and I know you know this, but all the metrics that you are seeing on your wearable data, this is the least accurate. It's getting better, and I expect it fully. And we have kind of rumbles that we'll be seeing new pieces of tech that will even up-level it's even more. But right now, it's the least accurate of any of the data points that you could look at on your sleep wearable tracker. So just know that that is the case so that you're not making major decisions. But you could still also extrapolate some particular trends. But anyone that's an Oura Ring user and saw the major differences that came when the algorithm shifted recently. So, and I knew tons of people, including doctors and people that were, participating closely and intimately with Oura, and yet they were making choices and decisions around the sleep staging that was coming back. And then it completely changed overnight. just that's what we're talking about. That's what we're dealing with. So don't lose your mind too much on particularly those metrics. But having said that, we can talk about deep sleep as a concept in general. And so what we would see there is one, glymphatic drainage with a G versus lymphatic drainage with an L. Glymphatic drainage being this really relatively new understanding around 2012, where we started to kind of understand this process of this brain cleansing that appears to happen largely within deep sleep. And it appears to have correlations between what looks like could be neurodegenerative issues down the road if not properly minded. And so if that is the case, because we have some pretty robust studies that certainly they seem to go hand in hand, so enough evidence that there must be something going on there. So if that's the case, then we can prioritize and support deep sleep so that you are getting that proper brain cleansing in the brain each night during that first half, and then helping to, we hope, stave off some of these concerns with neurodegenerative, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, et cetera. And these are big deals because that might be the long-term effect, but on the short-term effect, you also pointed to some of the brain health concerns or cognition, even short-term, because that would make sense. It usually doesn't happen like overnight. You deal with Alzheimer's, there's signs. So what we would want to cultivate is how can we, if we're talking about deep sleep, protect the front half of our night. And I will say that even for shift workers, if you're fearful, like, oh no, am I not going to get any deep sleep? Our thinking is that eventually you do entrain to whatever the system is or the timing is that you are connected to. However, you do have particular hurdles and obstacles because your environment doesn't match the things that you are partaking in. So the first half of the night, what can we do to support that? Well, then that has us reverse engineer some of the things that we're doing in the lead up to that time frame, as well as the environment that we are, kind of sleeping within. And I can tell you a couple things. So one, since we have a very large and robust database of Oura Ring users, we have one of the larger from a sleep optimization perspective outside of research. So little distinct, but because of that, then we are in that data, mining that for what are some of the things that actually move the needle. And in case you're like waiting for me to say, well, what's the sleep stack and the supplement? I will say that half the time it is honestly not about supplements or things of that nature that really move the needle. It is these things that we're talking about, these behavioral components, this light dark element, keeping consistent with our schedule, basically the boring things that a lot of people don't want to hear, but they make a huge difference. But some overnight things that I see from a deep sleep perspective, some quick things. One, meal timing not being underestimated. I'm sure you've seen that, time and time again. And so the traditional information that you'll hear will be 2 to 3 hours before bed. And that is true. We have the most robust data to point to that. However, I just had the opportunity to speak with the vice president of performance sciences at Whoop, and they are in the midst of a study looking at 4 hours before bed versus 2 hours before bed with their large database of wearable data. And it's appearing to be very favorable for the 4-hour group. Then if we go even further, there's some smaller studies that point to things like early time restricted feeding, and that gets much more egregiously early. We're talking like 2 p.m. and things of that nature of your last bite of food. So anyone that might be practicing or playing with this, even starting to move this back, bare minimum, the 2 to 3, but then what we see from wearable anecdotal data is more in the realm of 4, 5, 6 hours before bed, seeing this big jump up in deep sleep pretty reliably, but also absolutely a drop in heart rate very commonly, and then a rise up for many in HRV and other kind of readiness indicators. And then one of the other ones that we see a lot for deep sleep is around certainly temperature, and if available for people, things like cooling mattress toppers being one of those things where I can point to the data and know quite often when they started using their 8 sleep or chilly and when they weren't using that, if again available to you. If that's not available to you, things like absolutely bringing the temperature in your space much cooler than most people might be doing. So often we're looking at between 60 to 67 degrees. That's out of the Sleep Foundation. But we also see things like brown fat boosting when we're in some cooler environments, and knowing that's mitochondrial rich and all the benefits from that from a metabolic standpoint. There are a lot of things that we can do, but those are a couple to begin.
Love it. Yeah. I would agree with all of those. And what I've seen from Oura as well, I've used it for 6.5 years and my clients now use it. If I eat too closely to bedtime, it also affects my blood sugar. So blood sugar drops can definitely affect our sleep quality. And it's really rest or digest. So a lot of people think that if they eat, timing doesn't matter. A calorie is a calorie. Sleep timing, I mentioned that earlier. That's all that really matters. But I agree with what you're sharing as far as moving it back. I find that my resting heart rate is higher if I eat too closely to bedtime. It does affect my blood sugar. I wear a CGM as well. And it was really cool to be able to time the wake ups with the Oura ring because I don't want to check my phone in the middle of the night. So that was really cool. And then speaking of cold temperature, I keep my room around 68, 69.
Sure.
And I do have the Oura or the chili pads. If anyone wants them, you can have them. I wasn't really a fan because I guess I just feel like the body should be able to regulate its temperature, but I would choose that over taking Ambien. So what is that doing for somebody
so
help
good.
facilitate their sleep then?
Yes. So one, I'm so glad you spoke to the glucose piece. Most often when we are beginning with sleep optimization for people, some of the most common reasons that people come our way is they're frustrated with their difficulty of falling asleep or very commonly waking up throughout the course of the night or early morning awakenings. So when we talk about wake ups, first we always rule out sleep disorders, and there are many sleep wake disorders. So first we're ruling that out. And very commonly we will uncover some form of especially breathing based sleep disorders, but more. So ruling that out or treating that. And then glucose regulation is so key. I would like to have every person I work with wearing CGMs, but we almost always are suggesting for people to get those where possible. And many times they do get those who are able to then overlay that data. And so one, that can just be so eye-opening, even in and of itself, if you just mind that. And since we know that some of the estimates are between 88 to 92% of Americans in different studies having metabolic dysfunction of some type, we're talking about a lot of people. Most people are listening to this, probably not me. Oh no, it actually probably is you to some degree. I mean, just given the numbers, to some extent, many of us could be well served to just even understand some of these and also understand the fact that glucose exists on its own set of kind of circadian rhythms, if you will. So eating the very same thing at 8 a.m. is going to look very different than 8 p.m. So timing matters there as well. It's a big topic there, really important. And then for temperature, I love what you said there too, of we would like to have our body be able to regulate its own. So thermoregulation is crucial for overall health and well-being. Well, one thing that I like to have for people to have in the back of their minds too, because it could start to land as like, really, do I need to do all these things to sleep? Like, what is this extra talk? Why do we have to be so over the top? And part of this thinking too is that there's this theory or possibility that sleeping on some of these cooling apparatuses, if you will, could harken back to actually being closer to how we likely slept from our ancestors. Why? Because our thinking is, despite the fact that one of the biggest problems that I see with our sleep today in our modern society is the fact that we're spending on average over 93% of our time indoors and broken down between inside and automobiles. And this is creating this indoor issue. And this is really flaring up our sleep problems. But when we were outside and we slept on the ground, we believe, or very close to the ground would almost act as its own natural kind of cooling copper, if you will, because it would have been the coolest place in the environment that we would have been on. Very different than our modern kind of sleep environment that we're in now. Foam mattresses, kind of these warm things that we're sleeping on top of, and then covered with duvets and heaviness. And so we're kind of cooking inside of these artificial, kind of environments that we likely would not have experienced in the past. So we could consider that that is part of it's almost realigning us to these original rhythms. Then there's also another theory that things like weighted blankets might have been akin to the heavy, hides and things that we might have used to cover us in the past. Because we have to remember that our biology we slept like that and lived like that for thousands of years. This modern situation that we're in we're dealing with the recency familiarity effect. And we think that this is just how everyone lives, but we didn't really live like this. And so our biology is still aligned with how it was.
That is a very good answer to that question, because with biohacking, I love all of the supplements and protocols and all the things, but ultimately the more that we can live in harmony with nature, the more that we thrive. We forget, and I used to call it the high maintenance hippie podcast. So we forget that we are nature. We see ourselves in our fancy homes and our beds, and the more disconnected we are from nature, it does seem to misalign us from these rhythms and these cycles and these seasons. And I think that's where a lot of the dis-ease comes from. So you said more close to our ancestors, how they lived, that's been very helpful also for nutrition. The things that people eat today, I don't know if I would even really consider it food, but it's edible. But is it actually nourishing our body? So whenever you're confused, I always think, like, what did people do way back in the day?
Yeah.
Way, way, way back in the day. So that does make sense. And the bed that I have is a Samina bed. And so it's on a 3% incline to help facilitate the lymphatic flow. And some people, I think, will even have a 15%. I feel like I'd fall off my bed. Do you have your bed elevated, the head of your bed elevated at all for that reason?
We do actually, but one of the reasons too is that my husband has mild sleep apnea, and we know that that can be supportive as well. So do all kinds of tips and tricks for mild sleep apnea. And he's a good example for if anyone's listening and like, oh, boring, it's not me. Well, he's acted as my guinea pig for just about all of these things that I end up doing with these weird, wacky things. And he did not really exhibit a lot of the signs that a lot of people might think of. So he's not a big snorer, not overweight, not the big neck, some of the things that we might imagine. And yet, turns out, mild sleep apnea and even borderline into moderate. And we were able to do lots of kind of interventions. And there's so many cool things that are available for sleep apnea, particularly in that group, the mild and moderate, includes positional sleep therapies like you're speaking to. So the inclines, you can even, if you're not interested in, kind of adjusting your bed, then fine. Then you could also get even on Amazon, like wedge pillows, different things to make this available. Why would we care about doing that? Well, one, we mentioned lymphatic drainage, that even just using gravity to our advantage to help support that flow. Also, when we're talking about breathing, so many of us, and this is a whole other conversation as to why so many people, including kids, are dealing with mouth breathing, and lots of theories and possible things around vitamin D and other stuff. But when we start looking at that, how can we help facilitate that people are properly breathing throughout the entire course of the night? That's pretty crucial. And one of the things that can come about is when we go on our backs and we're flat, then that tongue coming and falling back, kind of cutting off that airway. And that can be really problematic to the quality of our sleep. We're talking about deep sleep. That is a huge way that we see so many people dealing with, because when you think about it, if you're in an awake state and then to alternate and switch through these multiple stages that you got to go through, that dropping down into deep sleep in a very vulnerable state to be in, then if the body is sensing danger of pretty dangerous to then not be
Yeah.
breathing, right? Then out you go, and then you got to go back through all those stages again. So that's going to be very inefficient. There's no way you're going to log the type of sleep staging that you're looking for. If some of these things are in the way, that's also why, certainly in this biohacking space, we see things like mouth tape and all of these things emerging to help support the breathing component of sleep. And that includes what you spoke to, the angle.
Something that I definitely did not learn in nursing school that I recently learned having someone on the podcast. His name is Dr. Ingo Mon. He is a biological dentist here in Scottsdale in the Arizona area. And he said that when we are, just like you said, not breathing properly, whether that's due to OSA or some type of sleep apnea, or you're snoring, extra weight, whatever it might be, it's going to change the state of our body. And people think, once again, sleep is just about duration, but there are stages that we're going through. And the deep sleep state, we're going to be taken out of that if we are not breathing properly. And so he said, for a lot of people that wake up to pee during deep sleep, the body produces ADH, antidiuretic hormone. And so what I have asked a lot of clients with low deep sleep, are you waking up to pee a lot? And there is an overlap there. So I can't say that's the only thing. I mean, are you drinking a lot of water before bed? But maybe there's a connection there. So it's so much more than, did I get 8 hours? It's what is the quality? What things are getting in the way of that? Why am I waking up to pee every hour? Does this have something to do with my glucose? Yes, it's the sleep, but it's all connected. It's all connected.
Oh, so good. And I love what you just pointed to there, because that's a very common complaint. Oh, how can I stop having to wake up in the middle of the night to go pee? And there are times where it truly is a hydration issue, like you pointed to, like the timing of the amount of liquids we're intaking. And so hopefully that can be a relatively easy fix and behavioral thing. But then there's also a kind of often false correlate with the fact that we're waking up, and yes, we do have to go pee most often because now we haven't gone pee for a bunch of hours. So it makes sense that we would have that urge once we're now cognitive or we're awake at this point. So yeah, we could go. But then we might misattribute that needing to go to that being the sole reason that we were awoken. And it could be actually lurking behind it all kinds of other reasons like you're speaking to. So is it sleep disorders? Is it glucose? Is it hormonal issues? Is it inconsistent sleep schedule? Is it temperature issues? Is it thermoregulation? Are there other nutritional deficiencies or, issues at play that we might uncover from a health perspective, physiologically? Are there, noises in the space? Or is your partner snoring? Kids, pets, all the things. There are so many components here. So this is, and I hope this doesn't land for people like, oh, geez, this is too much. Bye, gotta go. No, we want to instead hopefully inspire that this is a skill set, that sleep is a skill. And particularly because of the fact that we've drifted so far from what you spoke to of how things were. And if that's the case, then it behooves us to start to, one, question how were things and how could we bring in some of that into our modern society? And what can we do to just get curious and start to peel back the layers?
Yeah. Sleep is a skill. It's something that we have to practice, and we have learned. Who we are is learned, our habits are learned, all of it. So I tell my clients, never give up on the goal. Make sure you're implementing the things for a long enough period before you determine that they're not helpful. And sometimes you do have to change the strategy, but don't ever give up on the goal. And I think a goal of wanting high quality sleep is essential. I also like to explain it like this, that it's like a car wash. So people think, I got 6 hours of sleep, that's great. And maybe for some people that's true. I have heard men and women may have different needs. But I think of it like a car wash. Let's say I go through 75% of the car wash and I'm covered in suds. I guess I'm a little cleaner, but I haven't really gone through the whole process. So in that way, there's a lot happening during sleep that isn't just taking time off from being awake. What is happening? What is the body doing when we are asleep? What are some of the things?
That is so good. First off, I love that analogy. I think it's such a great visual for people of that incomplete nature. So I think that's a fantastic place for us to begin, because also if you go in the wrong way of the car wash, you're going to get different types of results. So meaning if you, for instance, if you go to bed later, we are likely to be lobbing off some of that deep sleep opportunity and later than your preordained bedtime, meaning because the body does try to entrain to whatever schedule you throw at it, which is amazing. It would be problematic if it never entrained. So if you do go to bed a little bit later, than say you always go to bed at midnight, and then today you go to bed at 2 a.m., you're lobbing off some of that potential for deep sleep. So that's one way into the car wash. So then you're missing some of those things that we spoke about, that lymphatic drainage, that tissue repair. If you're working out a lot, the ability so that you wake up the next day rejuvenated and not, stiff and, not actually getting some of the benefits of the time that you're spending at the gym or whatever, and pain management and so many other things. But say you go on the other side of the car wash and now instead you are waking up too early for your normal wake up. You say, oh, well, I want to get to this workout or got to go to the airport or whatever. Then you're missing out on more of your REM opportunity. So there's a real strategy here. So if you are going to have less sleep, then, and we don't want to be promoting that routinely, but if that's going to be happening, even the timing by which you have less of that is going to affect. So REM, can almost think of it like your inner therapist. So the component of being able to handle the things around you, emotional regulation, that's also why there's beginning to be more of a question from kind of a functional psychiatric approach that so many of our SSRIs are hitting at our REM, and that could be concerning. So in the short term, you have almost like a mood boost. We see that with depression when people actually shorten some of their sleep timing, then interesting and oddly, they might kind of feel more energy and more alert. But over time, could that be problematic? Same rules could apply. We're questioning, we're wondering if we're taking things like SSRIs and hitting at that REM possibility, what is that doing for us over the long term? So both sides being crucial and important to the functioning and well-being of our experience of the world around us. And so I think that this goes back to this conversation of timing being key, and that there's so many factors that sleep is a puzzle, and it's not just about, to your point, the duration. So many people fixate on that duration. Now, duration is important, and we do have large scale meta-analysis that if you start going lower than 6 hours, we do start to see some pretty clear things: diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cognitive decline, death from any cause. That was out of a very large scale study in 2010, I believe. And so that seems to be pretty clear, but also too much sleep can be concerning. And then we want to understand hypersomnia and, why are we needing that much sleep when we start going into whatever, the 10, 11 hours, and are we dealing with undiagnosed sleep disorders or what have you? So even just purely on the duration piece, there's question and nuance. And then it goes into the regularity, the consistency, the quality. It's really a wonderful and exciting world that you can tap into, because then when you do that, when you do take the time to look at this thing that is, we do for a third of our lives, on average 26 years spent asleep. And yet if you're thinking that your primary care doctor is going to be catching any of the signs that something is not working in your sleep, unfortunately, that's really unlikely. Why? Because even out of Harvard Med, we're seeing that the average doctor is getting 2 hours of training in sleep in the thing that we're doing 26 years of our lives. So that's a big problem. So the red flags that might be there, they might go unseen. So you really want to have personal agency and advocacy and interest in this area to really make sure that we're not missing crucial things for you.
I mean, I can speak to the culture of the hospital environment. Yes. And bless those residents, because I think I had it tough as a night shift nurse. 12 and a half hours. So I'd go in at 7 p.m., leave at 7:30 in the morning if I was lucky, and pray that I would get home safely. But some of these residents and interns, first year residents, they would do 36, 48-hour shifts where they're on standby. They do have a sleep room, but it's so fragmented. Yeah. And I don't want someone who's a brand new doctor at a teaching hospital, sleep deprived, calling the shots. No, but that is... Yeah. It's how can you value something that you are not taught to value in your $200,000 plus investment in
Yeah,
medical school? Same with
totally.
nutrition. I know nutrition, maybe it's getting better, but a lot of the heart healthy foods in the hospital, I don't know that I would consider to be heart healthy. And there is very little regard for sleep. I never worked ICU or ER. I was always inpatient. And especially for CV, those patients in 2020 and 2021, a lot of them just wanted to sleep through the night. They're like, I just feel like
Mm.
I'm going to lose my shit if I don't get some sleep. I'm like, I get it. But I needed to get an order from the doctor that it was okay to not interrupt them for 4 hours.
Oh,
For that,
God.
that was it. That was as much as you could get. So someone's coming in, poking you. It's just how can the body heal without getting enough sleep? So one thing that I'm all about in my coaching is resilience. And that's a new feature that Aura added, but it
Yeah.
seems like nighttime recovery, and daytime stress. So nighttime recovery, that my understanding is that it has a lot to do with how long it takes for our heart rate to stabilize in the first 6 hours, which is
Mm.
indicated by a recovery index under readiness. So why might someone have poor nighttime recovery and why does the heart rate make a difference in nighttime recovery? Why does that need
Yeah.
to be a little bit lower?
Absolutely. So first off, well, one, what you pointed to in the hospital setting, I really truly believe that that's going to be another big trend in wellness that we'll see building biology, particularly in the hospital space and in our indoor spaces, and that we'll have kind of circadian aligned lighting, temperature, all these things that can be conducive and hopefully not having to sign off to let people sleep for 4 hours or what have you. But I get it. I mean, important, and yet I think there's room for improvement. So even saying that, yes, there's these new components to kind of stress management and understanding how our sleep plays a role in our stress management. And that's coming out in new features with the Oura Ring. Also, some newer features that are supposed to be coming very soon include reflections. So that will be coming, and that will give us the opportunity to even further espouse what's going on, what's working, what's not working, and chart and graph those things. So we'll get lots more information. But from resiliency, this is the whole game. And people talk about concerns with the nocebo effect with wearables, and you wake up and you keep getting these crap scores, and then it kind of colors your experience of the day. And we do have studies that will point to if you tell someone, oh my gosh, you had the worst sleep, and even if they had great sleep, they say, oh my gosh, I did, and then they change their state in alignment with that. So we do want to be mindful of what type of power we're giving to these wearables. That's why I definitely want to make that point that if you are stressing over the sleep staging in particular, just be aware of that there's some shortcomings at the moment. But resiliency is amazing because we're looking to train for resiliency even when we have the rough night, even when the kids wake us up, even when whatever. And so resiliency can kind of bridge that gap, if you will. So that's where we're looking at how are we, one, being aware of what you're pointing to with the heart rate. So many people that track with Oura or Whoop or some of these other trackers showing us the shape of your heart rate throughout that course of the night. Now, Aura puts it in terms of like a hammock shape, and so that you're looking to somewhat, and don't get neurotic here because it will adjust, but can you somewhat have your lowest resting heart rate happening in the middle-ish of the night? Why is that important? Well, there's a lot of pragmatics beyond just, gamifying our stats. And what I see most commonly, I literally just sent a voice note to a client about this today because they were asking about recovery index, and they said, my heart rate keeps getting to its lowest resting point, lowest resting heart rate right before they're waking up. And we see this all the time. And if that's the case, what do we think would be the problem with that? Well, if it's taking the body so long to be able to get to some of its deepest levels of relaxation, and then you got to wake up and then shift from an asleep state to an awake state, and then be able to go about and have energy and what have you, kind of like good luck. That's when we instead feel zombie-like and just sludging, and that extra sleep inertia time expands because now it took you so long to get to that point, and now you got to go do all your responsibilities for your day. And so why would that happen? Well, very commonly, there's a whole litany of things. So late exercise, alcohol, THC, meals we spoke to, blue light or bright lights in general later into the night, and insufficient exposure to bright light by day, darkness by night, all kinds of things that can affect your ability to properly wind down in the evening, not to mention stress and mental health disorders, chicken or the egg, is it the sleep, or is it mental health, who knows? So we want to then explore what are some of those common pieces. And sometimes it's so simple. It was too hot in our room and it took, that was a piece of it. So it depends.
Yeah, I've learned if I eat restaurant food, if I eat at home 2 hours before bed, that doesn't seem to send me over the edge. But for whatever reason, restaurant food is a little bit different. I don't know if it's food quality. I don't know if it's heavier ingredients, but I have definitely noticed that. Have you seen that as well? That for whatever reason, people who eat a meal at a restaurant or a dinner at a restaurant, that affects their sleep differently than if they cook it at home?
Yes, there's some really fascinating studies around quality of food and even things like apneas. And so, I know I've been talking a lot about respiratory, how we're breathing throughout the course of our night. And even if you're not dealing with apneas or snoring, we can extrapolate that added inflammation from kind of the food choices that we might be making or deviations from our normal kind of repertoire of macros or what have you, and quality and maybe added processing or questions of oils or what have you, any added inflammation can be problematic to our ability to breathe throughout the course of the night, but then also to rest and lower that heart rate. So yes, and not to mention the timing and things that can come up, especially with social dynamics, because that's one of the things that we see for people is this kind of perfect storm of how do we manage a society and a lifestyle that can be at odds? Because a lot of the things that we're asking of people to explore are purely and truly outside of the bounds of society of how it's been constructed right now, which is one of the reasons why I got the domain Circadian Collective. And I want to be hosting more routinely circadian aligned meetups and things of that nature so that we are not having to have the 7 p.m. dinner or what have you. Because also one of the really interesting things we find too is the process of socializing, because we know loneliness can really hit at sleep results. And we saw that during COVID. And so socializing is crucial for our well-being and our sleep results. We see that for longevity studies. I mean, you've got to have your community and your people. And if we are doing that timing component, I see this all the time where people say, I just was out with people and then it took me so much longer to kind of wind down after. You're getting all, even if it's fun, you had all kinds of, you're amplifying your brain processes and it can take longer to then wind down thereafter. So might be adding on all of these components. So can we play with the timing? I talk about sleep leadership almost in our programs of leading our social groups. Can we start being the person that hosts the brunches or the lunches or the caffeinated book club meeting? I don't know, all these different things that then more are more circadian aligned. So hopefully we can have it all. And that's not to say we're trying to avoid the normal functions of society, but I think this is a big part of it because you hear all this stuff, but then if it's like, well, that's not practical, so I'm going to cut it all, that's not our goal either. So how can we kind of infiltrate all of these topics and have them come together?
I love that because a lot of my friends today, they know that I don't want to say solar powered, but I do not commit to plans after dark, not in the winter. It's especially because I live so far outside of the city. I don't like driving at night. I want to be home, but I'm like, let's tear it up in the day, like morning brunches. Can
you move to Austin? I mean, come on.
You never know. You never know. I love it here, but I'm so grateful for my friends who share this similar lifestyle because the need for community is so important. And if that's when your friends socialize, I was a big party girl in high school and so much into college, but that's when I was going to connect with my people.
Yeah.
And as I did I started getting into biohacking in 2017 and I met more like-minded people. I'm like, oh, there are people like I thought it was health or fun. I didn't think you could
Yeah.
have both. And I can say that you can, just let's look at the timing. And I think
Totally.
you would agree with that. So yeah,
100%. It's so crucial. We had a fascinating guest on the podcast who's kind of a sleep anthropologist, studied the Hadza tribe in Africa, brought Oura rings to the Hadza tribe, and started looking at this conversation of what he calls social capital. And so a lot of the people in our cohorts and stuff hear me talk about this all the time, that every so often, the Hadza tribe or examples of, modern-ish hunter-gatherer tribes, how they will often be circadian aligned almost all the time, except there will be periods where there's festivals or what have you. And that's when you indulge and you stay out late and you have fun and time with your friends. And the thinking is that could be a time where you kind of rationalize this as your social capital investment. Because most of the time you're investing in your sleep capital
right.
and your well-being and all those things. And that's maybe, 80, 90% of your existence. And then every so often, if something happens, you go out to dinner and the dinner comes late, everything gets pushed out. How can we be as empowered as possible to know that time with our people can reverse engineer to knowing that will feel like we're part of a group, a bigger, kind of community, and how can that support our overall well-being and support in turn our sleep? But if we can have it all, like you were pointing to, then how can we design so that we have the hikes and I do walk and talks here all the time here in Austin. So, we go out by the water, we get our coffee or whatever. How can we have a say versus being at the effect of traditional societal norms?
Yeah. And there are a lot of people out there that just don't know that other people like that exist. And if you want to be a night owl, cool.
Exactly.
It's not for me, but
yeah,
definitely a morning person, and just owning that and realizing
totally.
there are a lot of people like that. And so for me, 4 to 5 p.m. for a dinner, I used to make so much fun of my grandparents. I'm like, you guys are
Yes.
old. And now I'm like, please, I'll take the 4:30 reservation. So
yes, absolutely. I
but
love
that's
that.
because I want to be a healthy older adult. I want to look good. I want to feel good. I want to have my memory. I want to be independent. So it's not like I have no FOMO. I have no
Yeah,
FOMO. What I
totally.
experienced after crashing and burning in 2018 from years of night shift, I never want to feel like that again. So I'm going to socialize during the day. But unfortunately, many people don't seem to take these things seriously, sleep, health in general, until they've really
Yeah.
experienced a pain point. So what types of people are coming to you for guidance and help and coaching with sleep? Are they
Yeah.
just hitting a wall where it's been like this for a long time? Do they have some of those beliefs like I'll sleep when I'm dead? Oops, I guess that's not working for me. What are you seeing?
Yeah, really good points. Absolutely. So one, for the listener, you're not alone. And if this is an area that you're looking to cultivate, there are more and more people, and you can step in and sharing that loud and proud. And you'll be surprised the amount of people that will say, oh yeah, I like that too. Come along for the ride. And for those suffering or really feeling the struggle right now, you're also not alone. So what I see is, I will say a big portion of the people I work with have the ability to make their own hours, and yet it turns out to be this kind of blessing and a curse, and that might look different ways. So we saw that a lot during COVID, kind of the work from home revolution, and so many now people have this ability to work from home, or whether it's under a company or they own their own company or what have you. And what we see is that there is a blessing in some sort of structure quite often. And when that goes missing and we make choices like, well, let me sleep in because I had a rough night. And so that feels like the most loving thing you could do for your body. And yet it turns out that at least for a long term, sleep consistency, we're finding out, is just so crucial. And it's one of the first pillars that we want to work with. So when things go awry, So I see that with people that travel a lot, they're jumping to different time zones, or they can just sleep in on the weekdays, weekends, social jet lag, all of that. Well, I also see other groups. I see groups like retirees who used to have that structure and now they are missing of that. And they're also missing of kind of a clear purpose and reason to wake up each morning. And so that can get more esoteric, but there's that group. Then I also see a lot of people that are downstream from years of different types of sleeping medications that they have been on. And now they're very concerned because maybe they tried to get off and they were surprised by what they experienced. And so we also see those groups or groups that are fearful that they might be going down the path of now needing to have medication to sleep each night. So there's a lot of kind of crux moments and apex moments, whether divorce, loss of a job or some major life event can also spur on some of these things.
It seems like it's all connected for blood sugar, for sleep, for stress, nutrition, all of these things. People often say, what can I take so I don't experience XYZ? And I look at it as how can I get my system to be as metabolically strong, flexible, and resilient as possible for whatever comes my way. And the biggest thing I think is sleep, because if you can just get out of the way and let the body do its thing, there are people that say, oh, you don't ever need a doctor. You don't ever need meds. I'm not one of those people. I think there is a middle ground for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, without sleep, the body can't do the things that it needs to do. And a lot of people, I see this in biohacking too. Oh, I'm going to try to sleep as little as I can and do all the biohacks.
Yes.
I'd rather just sleep, but that's just me.
I agree. When we think of how you put it too, like kind of beginning with sleep, and naturally, obviously I'm biased, but I will say knowing what I know, experiencing what I experience, seeing what I see on the ground, and in the research, there's not a single domain of life that's not hit when we aren't sleeping well. And on the plus side, when we start regaining some power in this area, that things tend to ripple effect and improve in many, many domains of life. So if that's the case, I like to think of sleep as kind of this Trojan horse effect where often people come in and they want to, oh, I just want to sleep better. I want to get better numbers on my wearable or whatever. But it turns out that in order to fully influence those numbers, often we have to have a bit of a Trojan horse effect where the thing that you always thought you needed to, it would be important to maybe look at, but didn't seem like, you had the motivation or whatever, getting to the gym, eating well, managing that glucose mindset, down regulation in the evening, our environment, all those things, they're kind of nice to have. But when you start to go after having a lens that sleep becomes your base for your pyramid of well-being, suddenly it behooves us to then hit at those areas because you can have great sleep without, touching all of those other components. So it's a great place to begin, especially now with wearables, because it keeps you in the game, because it's not just like an idea. You have a running average. And like we said, with the resiliency piece, it keeps moving and, it's giving you your running average of the last 14 days or so of how you've been managing your sleep and your stress and your daytime and nighttime components. So, and these are just going to keep improving. And I hope that doesn't land as like, oh, geez, like we're so quantified self, but the quantified self component can be one of the most empowering pieces from a well-being, personalized, growth perspective. And that's one of the coolest things I've seen is that the practical takeaway, I've seen people literally leave relationships that aren't working for them because they've seen years of their HRV being impacted from the relationship that wasn't working. They leave it and then it just blossoms or what have you. It can serve as kind of this observer effect where you start to see your data and understand that you are in the driver's seat of some of these results. And you get to be responsible for those things and make the accordance or the choices that align to best serve you.
It's really interesting you say that because I am fresh out of a breakup and my data has changed significantly.
No way.
I am going to share on my solo episode a little bit more about it. I speak very highly about my former partner. I have his permission to share about it. We respect each other, just very different people, different things. But I did see a change in my data because both of us, in order for us to be true to ourselves, we were going to have to compromise on some things. And I don't think either of us wanted to compromise on our integrity. But
Yeah.
in coming back, I wasn't sure. Am I going to, because of a history of PTSD at night, am I going to struggle with my sleep? Is it going to be better? My HRV skyrocketed. It was like in the
No
40s,
way.
and then it is now in the 80s
Go
very
you.
consistently. And I wonder if just that mental ping pong and stress of like,
Mm,
oh, this is such an amazing person, all these little things that we may not think are affecting us, maybe they can. So I noticed that's very interesting that you also have
yeah,
seen
that's
these subtle things that might be weighing on us, even if it's an energy leak of like, am I doing everything right? Or a sense of urgency and healing that can affect our HRV and our body's ability to heal. So our state makes a huge difference. And my state is not very good without sleep.
Oh, same. Well, I so acknowledge you too for, these big life changes and these big chapters in our lives. There's often both psychological and physiological effects that we'll experience. And I'm so happy to hear then that appears to be quite favorable, because we actually had a doctor on the podcast that pointed to HRV as your joy score. And, granted, there's a lot of things that go into HRV. It's very complex, but I think that's an interesting thing to consider, and especially considering this is the time between our heartbeats. We see it come up on the daytime stress feature that's now on Oura and on Whoop. And so how we are engaging in the world around us gives us both our heart rate and our HRV. That's very reductive. Obviously, there's other components, but it's interesting to look at and consider some of the psychological factors. We do know that people that tend to deal with some chronic anxiety and different mental health issues tend to have more suppressed HRV activity. And so we do know that there's some component of the psychology and the physiology of these readouts. So it's very interesting. And it also, I think, can be empowering for someone that is struggling and then can have something objective to point to and say,
Yeah.
oh, wow, right? Like I didn't realize was taking a bit of a drop recently. I knew I was a little stressed maybe, but whoa, when I look at that, and then it can help us to almost give us kind of this, I don't know, inner parent or something to give us and grant us the permission to take some time to downregulate, to take some things off our plate if available. And, it just allows us to have a little bit more awareness of the world around us and how it's impacting our psychology and our inner state as well.
I'm really glad you brought that up. This was actually a question that people ask me in coaching, how to not panic over data. And I tell people the worse that it is,
Yeah.
it's just feedback. And if anything, it's helped me have more compassion for myself. You said
Yes.
that inner parent.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that I'm bad. It means
Right.
I feel exhausted, short fused, irritable. This makes sense. And there's
Yeah.
something I can do about it. And it's an opportunity for healing versus it somehow meaning I'm bad. I don't
Correct.
look at it. It is such an empowering tool for me, but everyone looks at it differently. But that's what I tell people. Would you add anything to that?
Oh, so good. Yeah, because that's some of the feedback I'll get routinely. And people will say, and granted, of course, there are case by case certain times or people's lives that they might not be served to have all the data at that point. But largely what I see is the exact opposite. And it's exactly in alignment with what you see is kind of this empowerment. So one, we know of something called paradoxical insomnia, where people will believe that they went to bed and that they got no sleep throughout the course of the day or throughout the course of the night or very little sleep. And then one thing that's nice about having an objective measurement tool is that we can say, oh, okay, I did actually get whatever, 5 hours or something. And often that can alleviate some of those stressors for people that believe that they got nothing and turns out I got something. Okay, I can get through this day. And that can be helpful from that perspective. Next, one of the things that I often have people remember is the benefits of often kind of rebound sleep. And so if you do have a rough night, typically we can imagine that on that subsequent night, or maybe worst case, the night following, that the body will go after getting this rich sleep for you, because the sleep that you get each night is not dependent just on an isolated set of requirements. Is not just getting the same type of sleep every single night. It's dependent on how you ran things previously. So if you just did a marathon, the body is presumably going to go after a bit more of that reparative type of sleep so that it can repair the tissue and the damage and what have you. If you were dealing with, a breakup or what have you, some of these things that can be mentally taxing, we believe that the brain is likely to be going after some of these reparative mechanisms for our psychology and processing all of these major life changes. So there can be different times where it makes sense for the brain to go after these different types of things. Now, if you didn't get a great night of sleep, what we typically see is then just this big shoot up of the quality of those sleep staging. So a bit more deep sleep, REM, to make up, if you will, for the night beforehand. So you can almost just hopefully rest at ease knowing that the body is intelligent. It will go after what it was kind of deprived of the night before. And one of the cool things is, I feel like I often see for people, especially to your point, as someone else that has been tracking for many, many years. I was tracking back with the Zeo back in 2011 and 12. I don't know if you remember that thing,
No.
on your head. The Zeo was a crazy, it was ahead of its time, this thing. But, all these different trackers that you can have. Eventually, what seems to happen, especially if you are training to understand more of this area, so you're not just getting information, have no idea what to do with it. You're learning, you're testing, you're in the data, you're, playing with this. Then over time, one of the things I see is almost a removal of the charge of the results with this. So meaning, someday you get whatever, I don't know, a 40 sleep score and readiness score or something really rough. Then eventually okay, I've been here before and I made it through. Maybe it wasn't my favorite day, but I can get through this. And it can almost just help to quell some of these judgments. And we see this a ton with people that are dealing with sleep issues. And I was one of them, an over perfectionist tendency, make wrong of myself, of oh my God, this is awful. What does this mean? Am I broken? Am I bad? Am I wrong? Ugh. And so this judgment we see very characteristically and often. And it's one of the components of trends that we see for people dealing with insomnia, difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, early morning awakenings. So if you have some of that judgment, that's a big defining characteristic of problems with sleep, because there's tons of people that run around and they get, maybe insufficient sleep and not great quality sleep, but they don't have it that it's bad or wrong. And they don't usually end up in the sleep clinics or what have you. Is that good? I don't know. But the meaning that we make out of it is a big deal.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's the meaning that we attach to things where we suffer versus, hey, this is an opportunity for me to sleep better. I haven't figured out exactly what that looks like for me, but there are people out there like you. This is what I'm really passionate about.
Yep, totally.
And we all resonate with different people. So there are many more things that I could ask you. And I know we definitely went over time, but in signing off, 2 questions. 1, how can people find you and work with you? And 2, what would be your biggest piece of advice for someone who is really struggling with sleep? Where would you recommend they start? Maybe 1 to 3 things.
Okay, beautiful. So 1, we'll begin with that last question then, I guess, because here's the message that I'd love to get out is, 1, if we are looking at all this information, I know we talked about a ton of things and it could maybe land as overwhelming for people. So if you just begin at one place, I would recommend here. So 2 anchor habits that we have people start with at Sleep as a Skill One is understanding your light dark cycles and rhythms, and how can we really set up powerfully our environments to facilitate it. I mean, I literally moved from New York to Austin partly so that I could have more sun exposure. So you can get as wacky or not wacky as you want. But mining our light dark cycles, understanding that a scientific consensus just came out last year, citing almost 250 circadian scientists, referencing almost 2,700 peer-reviewed publications, calling for warning labels on light bulbs, just their plain old stinking light bulbs at night, correlating with things like obesity, mental health disorders, reproductive disorders, cancers, and of course, sleep-wake, just for something as innocuous as turning on a 60-watt light bulb. So
Yeah.
what do you take away from that? Well, one, how can we mimic the rhythms of nature more than just about anyone you know around you? Like, how can you bring nature indoors and see the effects that come about with sleep? So, one of the fallouts of what we're seeing in our modern society and spending over 93% of our time indoors is that the average person is in an indoor environment that is around 100 times too dim as compared to our brightest outdoor sunlight. And on the flip side, in the evening is in an environment that is on average 100 times too bright as compared to the brightest moonlit evening, right? So, and that's coming out of that same scientific consensus. So if that's the case, then most of us, anyone that's in indoor environments under electric light, we are exhibiting circadian disruption. So that is a place to begin, because most people think about that as a pathology, like, oh, well, you have some sort of circadian rhythm disorder, and that's a whole other thing. No, most of us are dealing with some form of this. So start there, and then it behooves us to get into this nature. So you want to get brighter days, darker nights. That's the beginning. And then in alignment with that anchor habit of, particularly in the first part of your morning, getting that bright morning sun. I know you're a proponent and you know all of these things because they can make such a difference for our well-being.
It seems so silly, but even in I don't mean to cut you off, but even in a few weeks of that, people say, I feel so much better not looking at my phone first thing and going outside. But you're not going to get a billboard from the sun saying that. So I apologize for cutting off, but it's really powerful.
Yes. It's really powerful. And we've got all kinds of postulations and research as to why, but the takeaway and what would it look like in practical application is that you're getting up largely around the same time. And this would be that second part of that anchor habit is consistent wake up time, really 7 days a week. Now, it doesn't have to be neurotic. It can have some ebb and flow, but just like an anchor, you kind of, if it's a little early, a little late, you come back to largely at around that same anchor wake up time. And it's paired and married with bright light exposure as close as you possibly can. So starting there. And one of the things that I discover or find for people is once you get that environment it has a clear diurnal break. So you have day mode of super bright and active, and you kind of align things that way. And then night mode of darkened environment. So suddenly your environment kind of informs you of the behaviors to engage in. And this is a big deal. I know we have gone over. So one of the last points with that piece is that one of my favorite studies that came out recently was called The Mind After Midnight. I know we spoke about kind of our experience of the world around us. And this Mind After Midnight study spoke to the fact that we're discovering this diurnal pattern to our thoughts, which is fascinating. So what they found was that in whatever your midnight is, your wee hours of the morning, then we discovered that the types of thoughts that we're having in those hours tend to be very different than your day thoughts. And sadly, suicidality rates go up in those wee hours of the morning, anxious, catastrophic thoughts, kind of flawed logic, if you will. So it behooves us, one, to get curious about the changing of our physiology and psychology throughout the different hours of the day, and two, to set our environment to pull for the results that we want to have. So just begin with day mode, night mode. That can be one of the most powerful places to begin. That's all consistent, and it's the rhythms of nature will inform us on how to align those quite largely. So that's that. And then the second part, what I would say is if people are struggling, my commitment on the planet is to help as many people as possible in this area. And what are some of the ways you can do that? One, we put out a weekly podcast with lots of different experts. I think we're having you on the podcast, please, if you're available, because we'd love to have you share all the things that especially with your background, and so good. So bringing experts on the podcast to share about different ways that people can support their sleep, and the often free things that people can do.
Yes.
Then we have a weekly podcast that's our weekly newsletter is going every Monday for over 5 years. So that's been a really fun place to kind of create community around these topics. And then if you're struggling beyond there, then we do have something called a sleep wearable audit. So we audit your Oura ring or Whoop data in particular. And then we can give you things that you can do to make a difference from there. Then we have cohorts, so small groups where everyone's wearing an Oura ring throughout the process of an 8-week-long program, and modules and things that you do to change and influence that data. And then lastly, we have one-on-one opportunities where people really immerse, and that's where we bring in different, genetics testing, blood work, hormone analysis, all kinds of things to really see some measurable changes between the beginning and the end throughout that process.
Awesome. So on Instagram.
So Mollie Eastman, and it's Mollie, Mollie, and you can also search sleep as a skill, and it'll come up that way too. But yes, and we're aiming to really get out as many kind of pieces of resources on there and social media and what have you, aiming to amp that up a little bit more than we had in the past. Before, it was largely based around the newsletter and the podcast. So aiming to get in on the social media game. So stay tuned.
You're doing awesome. I love all your content. And is Sleep is a Skill your website, or what's the best website?
Okay. Exactly. Thank you. Yes. Sleepisaskill.com is the place where you could kind of find most of these things. You can also take a sleep assessment that then you can get auto-triggered back different resources and things that you can utilize hopefully right away to make a difference with your sleep results.
That's awesome. I mean, we went over because I'm very passionate about it. You're very passionate about it. I have a whole list of other things. So maybe we'll have to do a part 2, but
would love it.
It's one of the most powerful things. And I also love that, we're both really into biohacking, but there's so much that's free.
Yeah.
And timing, temperature, light, all of these things that maybe we're not paying attention to. I'm certainly not here to judge if you're going to take Ambien, or what did Michael Jackson do? Propofol to sleep.
Sure. I mean, yes.
Just think about long-term, what is this going to do? And I was able to resolve this for myself. It sounds like you've worked with many people who have been able to. So if you get frustrated that you're not where you want to be, it takes time, but it is so worth it. And sleep is a skill, and it's a damn good one to have. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you, Mollie.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you for the forum that you're creating to empower people, and I appreciate being a part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Ashley Taylor Wellness Podcast. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and leave a review. Ideally, a 5-star review if you loved it. All of this is free of charge to the listener, and your reviews allow me to grow and bring on more amazing guests and to run the podcast. If you take a screenshot and tag me, I'll repost you and shout you out on Instagram. So tag Ashley Taylor Wellness and let us know what you loved about the episode. I'd also love to hear from you, and I'm open to any feedback, as I want to make sure I provide as much value as I can for you all. Email me at ashley@ashleytaylorwellness.com. And if you have any ideas or topics for guests, I am all ears. I will leave you with this disclaimer. This is not medical advice or replacement for seeking medical care. Everything discussed on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Always consult with your medical provider before making any changes. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.